The wind cut through the city that evening like a blade. It was the kind of cold that stung bare skin and made people wrap their coats tighter, lowering their heads as they hurried toward buses, trains, and parked cars. The downtown sidewalks pulsed with the rhythm of rush hour, hundreds of footsteps beating against concrete, everyone desperate to get home. But in the middle of that endless tide of motion stood one figure who didn't move with the crowd. Her hands trembled as she clutched the straps of a worn leather handbag, her pale knuckles almost as white as her hair. Margaret Whitfield stood on the corner beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, her eyes scanning the blur of unfamiliar faces rushing past. She asked softly, almost pleadingly, "Excuse me, could you help me?" But her voice was swallowed whole by the roar of engines, the honk of horns, the chatter of people glued to their phones. A man in a business suit brushed past her without looking, his earbuds shutting her out completely. A woman juggling grocery bags gave her a tight, apologetic smile, but didn't stop. For a moment, Margaret looked like a ghost. Visible but unseen. Solid, yet treated as if she didn't exist. The city had no time for a lost, elderly woman with confusion in her eyes. She tried again, lifting a trembling hand toward a pair of college girls rushing by. "I just need directions," she whispered. One of them shot her a wary glance, then quickened her pace, as if kindness would cost too much time. Margaret lowered her hand, her shoulders slumped, and for the first time that evening, her face revealed the weight she carried, the hollow ache of being unseen, unheard, left behind by a world that had moved on without her. The bag against her chest seemed heavier than ever, though inside it held nothing but tissues, a small notebook, and an old key she never remembered leaving home without. She turned her head one way, then the other, her eyes wet, searching the endless rows of buildings for a landmark that would anchor her memory. But nothing felt familiar. On the other side of the crosswalk, a young man strode with long, tired steps, a gym bag slung across his back. His sneakers squeaked faintly against the pavement with every stride. Darius Johnson had just finished basketball practice, his muscles sore, his mind already on the leftovers his mother might have waiting at home. At 21, he carried the tiredness of someone twice his age, balancing schoolwork, practice, and shifts at the corner store to help Angela, his mother, keep their small apartment afloat. His hoodie was pulled up against the cold, his breath puffing white into the air, his earbuds dangling without music. He wasn't in a hurry, but he wasn't looking for distractions either. That was when he saw her. The lone figure standing stiffly on the corner, her body small against the swarm of rushing people. Something about the way she hugged her bag, her frail fingers trembling against the zipper, made his eyes linger. He slowed, his instincts pulling at him, even as his exhaustion urged him to keep walking. For a heartbeat, Darius told himself it wasn't his problem. He'd learned that lesson too many times in this city. Stopping could mean being late, getting caught in someone else's mess, or worse, being judged for intentions that weren't even there. He could already hear the unspoken warnings from friends. "Mind your business, man. You don't know her. Just keep walking." But then Margaret lifted her face again, her lips parting in a small plea to a couple who dodged around her without a word. The hurt in her eyes stopped him cold. It was the kind of hurt Darius recognized, the look of someone who felt invisible, dismissed before being understood. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mother's eyes when customers spoke down to her after long hours at the diner. It was the look he sometimes caught in the mirror when teachers or strangers assumed things about him before he opened his mouth. He shifted his bag on his shoulder and stood still, caught in the tension of choice. The crowd flowed around him now too, brushing past with impatient nudges. He could just turn away, slip back into the stream, and no one would blame him. But something inside refused to let him move on. Finally, Darius drew a slow breath, tugged down his hood, and stepped forward through the stream of bodies. Each step felt heavier than it should, as if the city itself resisted this small act of noticing. He approached her carefully, his voice steady but gentle, carrying just enough strength to cut through the noise around them. "Ma'am," he said, his words breaking the silence she had been drowning in all evening. "Are you okay?" Margaret's head snapped toward him, surprise flashing in her watery eyes. For a second, she looked as though she didn't believe the question was meant for her. Then, slowly, the tightness in her mouth softened. Her hand gripped her bag tighter, almost as if anchoring herself in his voice. And in that moment, as the city raced blindly around them, two people, a weary young black man with a gym bag and an elderly white woman clutching her handbag, stood still in the current, their paths crossing in a way neither of them could have expected. Margaret opened her mouth, ready to explain, though the words trembled on her tongue. And Darius, though he didn't yet know it, had just taken the first step into a story that would change both of their lives forever. For a long second, Margaret just stared at the young man in front of her, as though she was unsure he was real. His question seemed to hang in the air, fragile, like a thread between two strangers who had no reason to stop for one another. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes shimmered with the weight of words she wasn't used to speaking anymore, at least not to someone who truly listened.
I don't know where I am,
she whispered finally. The words tumbled out shaky, like they had been locked away too long.
I was looking for an address, but everything looks different.
Darius nodded slowly, softening his stance so he didn't look like another hurried stranger. His gym bag slid from his shoulder to his hand, resting at his side. "That's all right," he said, careful not to crowd her. "What's the address you're trying to find?" Margaret fumbled with her handbag, her fingers clumsy from the cold. She pulled out a small notebook, the pages bent at the corners. She flipped it open with trembling hands until she found a line written in neat cursive. 42 Pine Street. Darius frowned. "That's way across town," he said. "But I think Pine Street's got mostly apartments, not houses." Margaret's brow furrowed, her confusion deepening. "My sister lived there. She always had tea waiting for me. I was sure if I just kept walking, I'd find it." Her voice cracked, a mixture of determination and despair. Darius studied her for a moment, weighing the truth in her eyes. She wasn't drunk, and she didn't look dangerous. She just looked lost. Lost in more ways than one. He could have pulled out his phone, given her quick directions, and walked away. That would have been the easy thing. But when he imagined leaving her to stand here in the cold, surrounded by people who would keep ignoring her, his chest tightened. He shifted, planting his feet firmly. "Tell you what," he said gently. "Why don't I walk with you? We'll figure it out together." The offer seemed to startle her. She blinked at him, her lips twitching with hesitation. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Darius said simply, and he meant it. The crowd surged again around them, and for the first time all evening, Margaret allowed herself to move with another person instead of against the tide. She clutched her handbag tightly and gave a small nod. "All right," she murmured. "Thank you." They began walking side by side, Darius adjusting his stride so her shorter steps could keep pace. The noise of the city felt a little less sharp now, less hostile, as though the act of noticing had softened its edges. For a while, they walked in silence. The only sound between them was the shuffle of shoes against concrete and the distant hum of traffic lights switching from red to green. It was Margaret who spoke first, her voice almost carried away by the wind. "People don't usually stop," she said. "They look at me like I'm in the way, or they don't look at all." Darius glanced at her. The streetlight caught the fine lines etched deep around her eyes, lines carved not just by age, but by loneliness. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "I know that feeling." Her eyes flickered toward him, curious. "You do?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "People see me and make up their mind before I say a word. They see a young black guy in a hoodie, and that's enough. Doesn't matter if I'm carrying books or groceries. Doesn't matter if I'm just heading home." He shrugged, the movement heavy. "Sometimes it feels like I'm invisible. Other times like I'm too visible for the wrong reasons." Margaret's lips pressed together, her expression softening. For a moment, her confusion cleared, replaced by recognition. Not of the street around her, but of the boy walking beside her. "I suppose," she said slowly, "we both know what it's like to be overlooked." The words settled between them, quiet but powerful. Two lives, worlds apart, meeting on common ground, neither of them had expected. They turned down a quieter street, the noise of downtown fading into the distance. The shop windows here were dim, shutters already pulled down for the night. The glow of an old diner sign flickered across the pavement. Margaret tightened her scarf, her breath rising in little puffs.
Tell me,
she said suddenly, almost as though the question had been waiting inside her all along. What do you dream about, young man? Where are you walking to when you're not guiding lost women like me? Darius blinked, surprised by the directness. He wasn't used to strangers asking about his future. Most people didn't expect him to have one worth hearing. He scratched the back of his neck. I want to go to college, he admitted finally. Maybe play ball, maybe study business. I don't know. Just something better than what I got now. But scholarships are hard, and money's tighter than tight. So most days I just dream. Margaret listened with a stillness that felt different from the indifference of the crowd. Her eyes softened, as though she could see not just the boy walking beside her, but the man he wanted to become. The city blocks stretched ahead of them, dark and unfamiliar. And though neither of them knew it yet, the walk they had begun together was leading them not just to an address, but to a turning point that would alter the course of both their lives. Darius glanced at her, sensing her weariness, her steps slowing. You all right? He asked. Margaret nodded faintly, though her voice wavered. Yes, I'm just trying to remember. I think we're getting close. But Darius wasn't so sure. Something in her words, the way she said, trying to remember, sent a small shiver of unease through him. And as they turned the corner toward Pine Street, that unease would soon give way to a revelation neither of them expected. The closer they came to Pine Street, the quieter it grew. The hum of traffic faded behind them, replaced by the hollow whistle of the wind slipping through narrow alleys. Street lamps flickered at odd intervals, casting pale circles of light that barely held back the shadows. Margaret's steps slowed as they turned the corner, her breath visible in the cold. She scanned the row of buildings ahead with wide eyes, but her face was filled not with recognition, only with doubt. This doesn't look right, she murmured, clutching her handbag tighter. It used to be brighter here. I remember flower boxes in the windows. But these buildings... Her voice trailed off into the night air. Darius looked at the brick facades, chipped and weathered, their paint long faded. No flowers, no warmth, just tired structures with metal gates drawn tight. He shifted his gym bag, watching her struggle to fit the present moment with a memory that seemed to belong to another time. Ma'am, he said softly, are you sure this is the right place? Margaret frowned, pulling out the notebook again, her hands trembling as she flipped through its pages. It says 42 Pine Street, she insisted, pointing to the neat cursive handwriting. My sister lived here. I came here so many times before. She always had tea waiting for me. Her words carried a desperation, as though repeating them might make them true. Darius took the notebook gently, glancing at the address. Something about the way it was written, carefully, almost like a reminder, made him hesitate. He pulled out his phone and searched for it. The map showed Pine Street, yes, but not a house. Instead, a facility's name popped up beside the address. Rosewood Assisted Living. He stared at the screen, his stomach tightening. Slowly, he lowered the phone. Ma'am, he said carefully, this isn't your sister's house. It's a care home. Do you live here? Margaret blinked at him, confusion sweeping over her face like a cloud blotting out the sun. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I live with my husband. He'll be waiting. He always waits. Her eyes flickered, searching the street as though expecting to see him step out of the shadows. We've been married 35 years. He makes the best stew when it's cold out. The words pierced Darius's chest. Something in her tone, not just the certainty but the love, made it clear she believed it. But the way her eyes darted nervously told him another truth. She was caught between memory and reality, and she didn't know the difference. Mrs. Whitfield, Darius said softly, using the name written in her notebook. I think maybe you forgot. Your husband... He stopped himself, unsure if he had the right to say it, to break her fragile version of the world. Margaret's lips trembled. She looked down at the cracked pavement, her voice barely a whisper. Sometimes I forget. The days run together. I thought if I came here, maybe I'd feel like myself again. Her fingers tightened on her handbag, knuckles white, But everyone just walked past. No one saw me. Darius swallowed hard. He didn't know much about memory loss, but he knew what loneliness looked like, and he couldn't shake the image of her standing there on that corner, invisible to everyone but him. He nodded firmly, offering his arm. "It's okay. You're not alone now. Let's get you inside. It's warm there." Margaret hesitated, then slipped her hand onto his arm. Her grip was light but trembling, as if afraid he might vanish like the others had. Together they walked toward the gated entrance with the brass letters, Rosewood Assisted Living. The moment they reached the door, it flew open. A woman in scrubs rushed out, her expression frantic. "Mrs. Whitfield?" she gasped. "Oh, thank God!" Her name tag read, Ellen Brooks. She hurried down the steps, relief etched across her face. "We've been looking everywhere for you. You can't just wander off like that." Margaret shrank slightly under the nurse's tone, guilt flickering across her features, but she held tighter to Darius's arm, her voice soft. "I wasn't alone. He found me." Nurse Brooks finally noticed Darius, her breath catching as she took in the sight of the young man standing protectively beside Margaret. For a moment, her professional mask cracked, replaced by raw gratitude. "You brought her back?" Darius nodded, shifting uneasily. "She looked lost. I couldn't just leave her." The nurse's eyes softened. "Most people did. You have no idea how many calls we made. Thank you. Truly." Margaret squeezed his arm then, her eyes glistening with tears. She tilted her head to look up at him, her voice trembling but full of conviction. "You're my angel," she whispered. The words struck deep, echoing in Darius's chest long after she was gently guided back inside. He stood there for a moment under the glow of the entryway light, the city noise muffled behind him. He hadn't expected gratitude. He hadn't expected anything at all. But in her eyes, for just a second, he had been seen in a way that felt different from how the world usually looked at him. And as the door closed behind Margaret Whitfield, Darius didn't yet realize that this small act of kindness, stopping when no one else would, had set in motion something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The night air felt sharper once the heavy door of Rosewood closed, leaving Darius on the steps. He stood for a moment in silence, his gym bag hanging from one shoulder, his breath rising white against the glow of the facility's sign. Something in Margaret's last words clung to him, echoing like a bell inside his chest. "You're my angel." He didn't feel like one. He felt like a tired kid who had just done what anyone should have done. Yet the way she had looked at him, as if he were the only person in a city of thousands who truly saw her, made his chest ache. Inside, muffled voices rose and fell. Darius adjusted his bag and turned to leave, but the door swung open again. Nurse Ellen Brooks stepped out, her shoulders sagging with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She glanced at him, her eyes carrying the kind of gratitude words rarely capture. "You're still here," she said softly. "I was hoping you hadn't gone." Darius shrugged, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pocket. "Just wanted to make sure she was okay." "She will be now," Ellen assured, though her tone carried more weight than certainty. "Mrs. Whitfield, she wanders sometimes. Her memory slips. Some days are clearer than others. Today wasn't." She paused, then added with a small smile, "But she kept telling us an angel would come. Seems she was right." Darius shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. "I just walked her back. Anybody could have done it." "Maybe," Ellen said, her voice firm, "but you did, and that made all the difference." Her words settled over him, grounding yet heavy. He nodded, then finally turned to go. At home that night, Darius sat at the small kitchen table while his mother, Angela Johnson, placed a plate of reheated stew in front of him. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and onions, the kind of homey mix that clung to walls no matter how small the space. Angela's face was tired, lines carved deep around her mouth from years of double shifts at the diner. Yet her eyes softened as she watched her son eat. "You're quiet," she said gently, sliding into the chair across from him. Darius stirred his stew, then told her about Margaret, about the corner, the notebook, the long walk to Rosewood. Angela listened, her spoon motionless in her hand. When he repeated Margaret's words, "You're my angel," his voice faltered. Angela reached across the table, laying her calloused hand over his. "You did good, baby," she said. "Don't ever let this world make you think kindness is small. Sometimes, it's everything." Her words warmed him more than the stew, but as he went to bed that night, the image of Margaret's tearful eyes followed him into his dreams. Days passed. Darius returned to his routine: school, practice, work. Yet every time he passed the corner where he had found Margaret, he slowed, half expecting to see her standing there again, clutching her handbag. She never was. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths weren't finished crossing. One afternoon, just as practice ended, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Is this Darius Johnson?" The voice was steady, professional, with the faint weight of age. "Yes, sir. My name is Harold Benton. I'm Mrs. Margaret Whitfield's attorney. She asked me to contact you. Could you come to Rosewood tomorrow afternoon? She'd like to see you." Darius blinked, gripping the phone tighter. She remembers me?" "Oh, she remembers," Benton said, his tone softening. "And she insists. Will you come?" Darius hesitated only a moment. "Yes, sir. I'll be there." The next day, he walked through the doors of Rosewood, his nerves humming. The lobby smelled faintly of lavender polish and warm soup, the kind of scent meant to soothe visitors into believing everything inside was safe. Nurse Ellen greeted him with a smile that seemed to carry secrets. "She's been waiting for you," she said, leading him down a carpeted hallway. When they entered Margaret's room, Darius felt his chest tighten. The space was warm, filled with soft light and framed photographs of a younger Margaret with a tall man who must have been her husband. There were pictures of travels, birthdays, family dinners, a whole life captured in frozen smiles. Margaret sat in an armchair by the window, her silver hair brushed neatly, her handbag resting on her lap as always. When she saw Darius, her face lit with recognition so pure it startled him. "My angel," she breathed, reaching out her hand. Darius crossed the room and took it, her frail fingers gripping his as though he were her anchor. "I'm glad to see you doing better," he said softly. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, her voice trembling. "You didn't walk past me. Everyone else did, but you stopped. That means more than you know." Before Darius could answer, the door opened and Harold Benton entered, a tall man in a crisp suit, carrying a leather briefcase. His presence filled the room with quiet authority. He nodded politely at Darius before turning to Margaret. "Mrs. Whitfield, are you sure you'd like to do this now?" he asked. Margaret straightened in her chair, her voice steady despite her frailty. "Yes, I don't want to wait." Benton inclined his head, then looked at Darius. "She has something to share with you. Something important." Darius's pulse quickened as he turned from the lawyer back to Margaret. She held his hand tighter, her eyes glistening with determination. "My dear boy," she said softly, "you gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. Dignity. For that, I want to give you a future." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, about to change everything. Darius thought he had misheard her. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on Margaret's wall. A future. Her words hung there, almost too heavy to belong to the frail woman holding his hand. Margaret's eyes shimmered as she squeezed his fingers with surprising strength. "You didn't see an old woman to walk past," she whispered. "You saw me. You listened. Do you know how rare that is? Even my own family, what's left of them, they're too busy to look me in the eye anymore. But you stopped." Darius swallowed hard, unsure what to say. I couldn't leave you there. And that is why I must do this," she replied firmly, her voice gaining an edge of clarity. She looked to Harold Benton, who gave her an encouraging nod before turning his gaze on Darius. "Mrs. Whitfield has asked me to prepare legal documents," Benton said. His tone was professional, but there was something warm in the way he regarded the young man. "She has considerable assets, including a trust established by her late husband. She wishes to use a portion of these funds to sponsor your education, should you accept it." Darius froze. The word struck him like a jolt of electricity. Sponsor his education? His dream of college, the dream he had buried beneath the weight of bills, long shifts, and reality, suddenly flickered to life.
I don't understand, he stammered. Why me? You don't even know me.
Margaret's lips curved into a trembling smile. Because kindness matters. Because when the world turned its back, you didn't. I may not remember everything anymore, but I will never forget that. His throat tightened. For so long, Darius had felt invisible or misjudged, seen as a stereotype instead of a person. Now, here was a woman who barely knew him, yet believed in him enough to place her future, and his, in the same story.
But college is expensive,
he whispered, almost afraid to hope. That's why I have lawyers, Margaret said, her eyes twinkling faintly with humor. And that's why I have means. You will go. You'll play your basketball, study your business, whatever you choose. You will have a chance. The weight of her words crushed down on him, and for the first time in years, Darius felt his carefully built walls crack. His eyes burned as he tried to hold back tears. He thought of his mother, Angela, who had sacrificed everything for him. He thought of nights spent lying awake, wondering if his dreams would ever be more than just that. He couldn't speak. Instead, he dropped his head, pressing Margaret's hand to his forehead like a vow. She brushed her thumb gently over his knuckles, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Don't waste it, my angel. Live for both of us." That night, when Darius told Angela the news, she almost dropped the plate she was holding. "Say that again," she demanded, her tired eyes wide. "Her lawyer called. She's paying for my education, Mama." Angela sat heavily into a chair, her hand covering her mouth. For a long moment she didn't move, her eyes filling. Then she let out a shaky laugh, equal parts disbelief and relief.
"Lord have mercy," she whispered. "All these years I've been praying, and he sent you an angel in return."
She reached across the table, gripping her son's hand just as Margaret had earlier.
"Don't you ever doubt your worth, Darius. This is your time."
The days that followed blurred with paperwork, meetings with Benton, and visits to Margaret. Though her memory faltered often, whenever she saw Darius, her face lit up with recognition. She would pat his hand, call him her angel, and ask about his dreams. And slowly, something shifted inside him. His dreams no longer felt distant. They felt reachable. Months later, Darius stood in the gym of his chosen college, a duffel bag slung across his shoulder. He wore the school's colors for the first time, his jersey crisp and new. Around him, teammates laughed and stretched, but his mind was elsewhere. He pulled out his phone and glanced at a photo saved in his gallery. Margaret sitting in her armchair, her smile soft, her handbag resting on her lap. "Thank you," he whispered to the image, tucking the phone away before jogging onto the court. The seasons shifted, papers were written, games were played, and calls to his mother filled his nights. Each report card, each highlight, Darius carried to Rosewood to show Margaret. And though sometimes she struggled to remember details, she always remembered him. Always. One winter afternoon, as snow fell softly against the window of her room, Margaret held his hand and said, "You remind me of the son I never had. Promise me you'll keep walking forward even when the world turns its back." Darius nodded, his throat tight. "I promise." It was a promise he would carry long after that winter, because one day, when the chair by the window sat empty and the handbag no longer rested in her lap, Darius realized that Margaret's gift to him was more than money. It was belief. It was proof that the smallest act of noticing could ripple outward into a legacy neither of them could have imagined. Years later, the roar of a crowded arena echoed in Darius Johnson's ears. The polished wooden floor gleamed beneath the lights, and the scoreboard ticked down the final seconds of the game. Darius, now 26, stood tall in his professional team jersey, sweat dripping from his brow. With a final push, he drove past two defenders, leaped, and released the ball. The net swished clean just as the buzzer sounded. The crowd erupted. His teammates swarmed him, pulling him into a tangle of arms and cheers. But even as his name blared over the loudspeakers, Darius's thoughts drifted far beyond the court. He thought of Rosewood assisted living. He thought of a frail hand clutching his, of a trembling smile that had once told him he mattered. Later that night, after the interviews and the lights, Darius sat alone in the quiet of the locker room. From the pocket of his bag, he pulled out a photograph, faded now from years of handling. It was Margaret Whitfield, seated by her window, her handbag perched beside her chair. Her smile was small but steady, as if she already knew the man he would become. He pressed the photo to his heart and whispered, "This is for you." Back in his hometown, life had changed in ways Darius never could have imagined. His mother, Angela, no longer worked double shifts at the diner. She had moved into a small but comfortable home, her walls lined with pictures of her son, from his first college game to his professional debut. She often told anyone who would listen, it wasn't just basketball that got him here, it was kindness on both sides. But Darius wasn't content to let Margaret's legacy stop with him. With his first real contract, he established the Shao Whitfield Johnson Foundation, a scholarship fund dedicated to students from underrepresented backgrounds who carried both talent and heart, but lacked resources. Each year, dozens of young men and women were given the chance to chase dreams once out of reach. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Foundation's first learning center, Darius stood before a crowd of students and families. A banner fluttered above him with Margaret's name alongside his own. He told the story, how a young man, overlooked and tired, had stopped for an elderly woman everyone else ignored. How that single act of noticing changed not only her life, but his own. "When the world tells you to look away," Darius said, his voice steady yet full of emotion, "I want you to remember her story. Remember that kindness can echo longer than applause and further than money. I stand here because someone believed in me, and now I believe in you." The applause was thunderous, but what moved him most was spotting a few of the scholarship recipients wiping their eyes. Kids who, like him once, had wondered if they were invisible. That evening, when the event was over and the hall had emptied, Darius lingered alone by the plaque bearing Margaret Whitfield's name. His reflection shimmered faintly on the polished metal. For a moment he closed his eyes and imagined her there. Her gentle laugh, her firm grip on his hand, her voice calling him Angel. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "I kept walking forward." A breeze stirred through the open doors, carrying the faint scent of spring blossoms. It felt like an answer. Years rolled on. Championships were won and lost, trophies gathered dust, but the foundation grew. Hundreds of students carried Margaret's story with them into classrooms, careers, and communities. Her name became a quiet symbol of what could happen when someone chose to see another fully. Darius often returned to Rosewood, though the room by the window was long occupied by another resident. He would sit outside beneath the oak tree and tell new volunteers her story, not as a tale of wealth or charity, but as proof of something deeper, that dignity and kindness could bridge generations, races, and worlds. And in those quiet moments, when he looked back at the path his life had taken, he realized something. Margaret had not only given him a future, she had given him a way to pass it forward, because kindness, once planted, does not end. It multiplies. It takes root in the hearts of those willing to stop, to listen, to care. And so, in every scholarship awarded, in every young dreamer stepping forward into possibility, Margaret Whitfield lived on. Not as a frail old woman forgotten by the world, but as the spark that lit a fire in a young man, and through him, in countless others. The story of Darius and Margaret began on a sidewalk where one chose to see and the other chose to trust. It ended not in silence but in legacy, a legacy proving that sometimes the smallest act of kindness carries the power to change the world.